Welcome to Adventures in Life. I'm your host, Earl Beecher. Our guest is Dr. Richard Schneider. He's a very special man, as you will learn as we go through our discussion today. He is the CEO, I think I've got that right, for the Institute for Global Education. Dr. Schneider, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's wonderful to be here.
What is the Institute for Global Education?
The Institute for Global Education is a 501c3 nonprofit organization.
I'm glad you added that.
Dedicated to global education, global communication, and understanding among cultures, peoples around the world.
In other words, you're reaching out to people all around the world.
Correct.
To provide education.
Correct.
One of the things that I wanted to be sure, I want to find out what it is, how it functions, and all of that. Right. But your wife played a particular role in this, and I want to start with her. Tell us a little bit about her.
Well, it was 7 years ago when my wife was turning 62 and going on Social Security. She said, "Richard, it's time that I had a project of my own. I've been following you around now for 30-some years, supporting your projects and so on, and I'm going to have my own money. I want to do something myself with my money." And at that time, we were very interested in education because she had just spent 5 years in Costa Rica helping to raise the second granddaughter until she went to school. And at the very same time, I was at that time, the education chair of the World Citizens Assembly, which is a non-governmental group of organizations under the UN auspices.
The World Citizens Assembly. I haven't heard of it. Right. Where is it headquartered?
It's headquartered in San Francisco, and they meet every other year in either San Francisco or in New York.
How many nations participate in this?
Many. I would say more than 50 usually.
More than 50 nations?
Oh, yes, yes.
And is it educators who gather, or people from all different professions and walks?
All different professions, and one of the commissions within that is the Education Commission. And so,
what was your role in it?
I was the chair of the Education Commission for 7 years.
The World Citizens Assembly.
Right,
I had not heard of it. Okay.
Well, out of the discussion came the idea that a man from India had come to, I think, 4 meetings in a row, year after year, and kept asking me about coming to India and doing an education project. He said, "You have all these wonderful ideas. Why don't you come to India and put them into practice, do a demonstration?"
And that wasn't a case of practice what you preach, was it, by any chance? Sort of
well,
a
it was
challenge there?
Called on it.
Yes.
Well, at any rate, when my wife were talking about this, it seemed that this was just the right thing to do. I went to India then on an exploratory trip to see whether this was feasible, and it was very feasible. And then the problem, of course, was money.
Went to India, did you go to several locations and finally pick one, or
I was invited to India to be a keynote speaker at what was called the Unity of Man conference in Punjab, which is North India.
Okay.
And then I flew down with this man, John Ebenezer, and his son, Paul David Rees. And Paul David had been in Costa Rica taking a radio internship, never realizing that he would eventually become the principal of the school. He knew my wife when she was taking care of our granddaughter there in Costa Rica.
It's a small world.
It's a very small world.
Okay.
And so I went through a number of tribal villages and other villages in south central India, out from Hyderabad. And they had a little school there for the first 3 grades, and that's all the education there was there. But it just seemed like it seemed like the right place. So I came back to the United States and actually met my wife at the Robert Mueller School in Arlington, Texas. The Robert Mueller School is a school that really developed the curriculum for the World Core curriculum, which Dr. Robert Mueller who was Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations for 38 years and was called the prophet of education for the UN for a very, very long time.
Okay, Dr. Robert Mueller
Right.
was the Assistant Secretary General
Of the United Nations when he retired.
Now, the Secretary Generals get rotated from country to country, so he established the continuity, didn't he?
Yes.
For
yeah.
the UN.
Right.
And he's sort of the guiding spirit for the educational interests of the UN?
He certainly was.
And he's established a school in Arlington, Texas.
Yes. The first Robert Mueller World Core Curriculum School was in Arlington, Texas.
The first one?
Yes.
That infers there must be more.
There are 11 altogether now.
There are 11?
And perhaps are more than that by now.
And are they around the world? Or
Yes,
are they all
around,
in the
they're
US?
around the world. No, they're around the world.
Okay,
you know.
but they're headquartered in Texas.
Yes, that's correct.
I see. All right.
And so we then had a woman from Taiwan who, sort of out of the blue, invited me to Taiwan to speak there to a peace conference with the understanding that she would help fund one of my projects. And so the first $20,000 for the school came from her, and 6 weeks later, in 1994, August 1994, my wife flew to India and started the school from scratch.
Now, I find it interesting that you were funded by a lady from Taiwan to establish a school in India.
Correct. She had an abiding interest in education and an abiding interest in India. In fact, she had done some work in India. Well, more strange than that was she was actually Vietnamese. She was from Vietnam, living in Taiwan, and had done work in India. But anyway,
it is a small world. Okay.
So the money finally wound up, and Ruth went off to India to start this school. That was in August of 1994. Now, last January, January the 3rd, she died rather unexpectedly in Costa Rica. And I am now faced with the responsibility of taking over the complete administration of the school. She wrote the first 9 years of the curriculum for Mueller Global School.
Is that like from kindergarten through grade 9?
Through grade 9. And she lived at the school 6 months a year.
Okay.
3 months and 3 months at a time. And under, it's a very rural area.
It's a primitive area, is what I think I'm getting from it.
Very agricultural. The parents are mainly agricultural workers. They make less than $1 a day working in the fields. When they work, there's food, which is mainly rice. When they don't work, there isn't. And so many of the children, do not have enough to eat.
Do they have large families?
No, actually they do not. India, the world doesn't realize that India has done a lot about population, and it hasn't really been given as much credit as I think it deserves.
Well, I keep hearing it's going to be the most populous country in the world in a matter of a few years.
In very few years, it will exceed China in terms of population.
Wow.
But when you've got a billion people, you're going to obviously expect some increase. I mean, there's no way around it. They do not have a one-child policy like India does. I mean, like China does, excuse me. But they do have a two-child policy. And many, many other families only have 2 children. There are those exceptions, but in the rural areas, there is a great deal of effort to limit the size of the family to 2.
I see. Mm-hmm. There's so many things I want to ask you about. Your wife, Ruth, had established this school, and you're carrying it on. But you told me before we turned the cameras on that they had 6 memorial services for her in different parts of the world?
Yes, she died in Costa Rica, and the first memorial service was in Costa Rica, actually at Dr. Robert Mueller's home.
I see.
Up on the mountain.
Okay.
And the second one was, in New York, and there, the deputy high commissioner
headquarters or what?
Near there, and the director, actually the Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Elsa Stamatopoulou, delivered the eulogy. The Chief of United Nations Radio, Ayman Almir, attended. It was a very, very beautiful and rich service. The third service was in Portland, Oregon. That is where we have been living, at the Living Enrichment Center there. And the fourth one was the public service in the first service of the three in India. I arrived in Hyderabad at 1 o'clock in the morning. I then took a 6.5-hour drive over the potholes to Mueller. It's 210 kilometers northeast of Hyderabad in south central India. I arrived there in the morning, and the first service was that afternoon. The temperature got up to 105 degrees, and 1,100 people attended. The eulogy,
quite a tribute.
The eulogy was given by a 12-year-old by the name David, because I had said that I didn't want any adult eulogies. There were many people brought greetings and readings and so on.
I bet there was a real outpouring of love for your wife there.
It was quite extraordinary, and the service itself was conducted in. It was a Christian, Hindu, Muslim, and tribal service. It's quite extraordinary.
It is. We must pause for a public service announcement now, so stay with us. We'll be right back with Dr. Richard Schneider. Our guest is Dr. Richard Schneider, who is the CEO of the Institute for World Peace. And he's been explaining to us about some of the activities he's had in India, and in particular, a school that his wife started. And Richard, you were kind enough to bring some pictures of the school, of your wife, of the children. And perhaps they can show these while we're talking here.
Certainly, certainly. The day before my wife died, she said, "What I want you to do, Richard, is build me a library. Build a library for Mueller Global School." And so in her memory, the Ruth A. Schneider Memorial Library is going to be funded at Mueller Global School. It's going to be a state-of-the-art library.
Now,
There's going to be nothing else like it. It's in a small village in south central India. There's absolutely nothing else like it there. The picture that you see on the screen is 3 of the classrooms and one of actually the dining area. Tucked into that building is 4 classrooms, a kitchen, and a eating room. Tucked into that.
Do you feed the children at the school?
Yes, we feed them a meal and a snack a day. This happens to be my house. It was Granny's house. 4 years ago, we bought this little ramshackle house across the street and reconstructed it and put the wall around it. It's a 2-room house, and that's where the 6 children that I have accepted permanent responsibility for live in that little house. I'm Grandpa, and we take care of them. And then, of course, when I'm not there, I have to have someone take care of them for me. Yes. House father. No, we do. The kids do all their own work. 1 is 7, 1 is 9, 2 are 11, and 2 are 12-year-olds. They do their own washing, their own. It
sounds like you're teaching him self-sufficiency.
Well, we do a lot of what you would call values and moral education. Granny, my wife Ruth, believed that all of education was based upon a moral value. How you treat each other, kindness, consideration, be honest, treat with one another with respect. In a very positive way. And she set down 9 rules. She called them her 9 rules of life. And each morning, one of those rules were talked about in a kind of a meditation every day. And this went on, and over a period of time, the children integrated this into their thinking, and this values education. And you see this group of the younger children. this values education was integrated into the curriculum and written into the curriculum. This picture shows the group of kids, they're going to get ready to have dinner with me. Now, they had never sat at a table, never sat on a chair, and had never used a fork or a knife. And so each kid in the class, one group at a time, I set up a little Western-style dining room. I bought some tables and some chairs and silverware, and each of these kids came and had dinner with me. And we did the whole thing, candlelight and little hors d'oeuvres, and they love balloons. And so when they came to when they came to dinner with Grandpa, they got a balloon. And I had to have, each time I go, I have a little dinner with him.
How big was the school to start?
We started with 40 children. We started with grades 1, 2, and 3. None of the children could read or write 6 years ago.
Could their parents?
No. And most of the children, only a very few of the 40 parents, of the 40 children, I think only 6 of their parents could read and write.
And yet English is the native language over in India now. At least I was told that.
It's not exactly the native language. The major language there is Telugu.
Oh, okay.
It's the language of education. If you go on to higher education, it's English.
It's English.
But up until then, it's local languages. As you know, there are more than 400 languages in India.
I've heard that.
There are 13 official languages in India.
Oh,
in our area, the children learn, their basic language is Telugu, except for the tribal children.
Now,
and
are the classes
tribal
taught
languages.
in Telugu or taught in English?
English, Telugu, and Hindi.
Okay.
A kid by the time he gets to the 3rd grade should be able to write paragraphs in all 3 languages and speak basic English, Telugu, and Hindi. And if he happens to be tribal, like my littlest child in my house, who is 7 years old, his name is Ravi. He came to school last July. He couldn't even write his own language, and he only knew his tribal language. So he couldn't even talk to the other children in the school who spoke Telugu. Today, this kid writes me letters in English, but he can also write. There's one of my 6 kids right there, and there's another one.
Yes.
And this is a beautiful little girl who comes from a village, and her father brings her on his little motor scooter 14 miles every single morning, rain or shine. And it is really cute to see her on the back of this 90cc motorcycle, coming into school with her hanging on the back with her school books under her arm, and he brings her every single morning and then comes and picks her up every afternoon.
Now, you told me that the school has been expanding. It's been growing so fast. You're up to over 100 children?
130. We have 130 kids.
Now, this is a pilot school.
We call it a demonstration school. The idea was to demonstrate the value and implementation of the World Core Curriculum developed by Dr. Robert Mueller. And the idea was to do it in an area where we didn't have a lot of outside influences. There's only a few televisions in the school. There are no telephones, and very little contact with the outside. And most of these kids had never ridden in a car, had never worn shoes, had one set of clothing, and basically were just surviving. And what we wanted to do was create an educational environment that would show how much could be done with so little in terms of not only providing an education, but providing a new way of looking at life, a new way of thinking.
Not only the children, but their parents.
The parents as well.
Absolutely.
In other words, values education. What does life mean? Well, life has to mean, it's hard to understand what life means unless you have the basic enough to eat, and unless you're healthy.
Yeah.
You know, and
you
these are the
told
things
me-
that we try to
You
stress.
told me the snacks that you introduced to these students, they basically lived on rice
And dal.
Dal. I'm not sure what that was.
It's a sort of crushed up lentils.
Lentils.
Not my favorite food.
You
but
introduced
excuse me.
them to other foods, other clothing, other styles, opened up the world.
Well, for
Now-
example, when a kid comes to school in the morning, the first thing he does when he comes through the gate is washes his hands with soap and water. There's 2 big pans of water
They
right
had
there.
no sanitation.
None whatsoever. I have to tell you, Earl, that my wife and I built the first bathroom in a village of 14,000.
Yeah. On that thought, I want to pause for another public service announcement, but I want to come back to the things that you're doing now, the 50 schools and things that are underway, the things that are exploding around you, Richard. They're very exciting. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Dr. Richard Schneider. Our guest is Dr. Richard Schneider, the CEO of the Institute for World Education. And you were just telling us you had a pilot school or a demonstration school in India.
Right.
But there's a lot more going on now, Richard. In the few minutes we have left, fill us in.
Okay, one of the things that we want to do is to take this model and use it to demonstrate what can be done elsewhere. One of the plans is, right now that is underway, is working with the Santals, which is one of the largest indigenous groups in the world, 10 million of them, in building a whole series of schools in their state using this curriculum plan. The idea is to spread this kind of curriculum and moral education and value education system around the world in many different places. Of course, to do that, we have to prove that it works, and that's why Mueller Global School is so important, to prove as a demonstration that these values work, that this curriculum works, and that it can be used in many different cultures, no matter where it is.
Well, one of the things that impressed me, and I want to mention this, is that you not only taught the students, but you taught the parents, and they are growing gardens at home, which they didn't do before. So now they have trees, they have tomato vines, they have a lot of different things that are helping to raise the standard of living of the people as a whole.
Oh, absolutely. When we first went there, I don't think there was a single garden in this village. 55 of our children have their own gardens, and there are now almost 200 gardens in the village. It just shows what can be done with a very little effort and a lot of concentration of education and bringing the parents into the system. With parent meetings, with parent education programs, with making them part of the education system.
I bet you're going to have night classes for parents going the next thing.
Very soon.
Very soon.
Very soon.
I can understand this, and we will want to explore this further in the future. But I think it's just wonderful what your wife has been able to accomplish. Is she being nominated for any particular honor?
Well, she has actually been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And of course, just the nomination itself is a great honor.
It is.
I am committed to seeing that this school, in her memory, and the library that is built, stands for many, many years as her memory. As a matter of fact, part of her ashes will be in the library. And the school has many needs. You know, we need sponsorships. We need all the help we can get. This is not a project for just one single person or one single family. This is a project that the world itself needs to be involved in.
And I think the world's going to get more involved. I want to thank you for being our guest on Adventures in Life, Richard. It's been a privilege to have you here. And I certainly thank Niels in the studio for permitting us to come in and tape this today. Please join us soon again for more Adventures in Life.